The Blackout, Book 2, The Witness, written by Ion Esimai, published by Suburban Press, an eReads production. Chapter 1. The pop shook the windows like a gunshot. I sprawled across my bed on top of the covers. The sheets were too hot to touch. The ceiling fan pushed dead air around my room in slow, useless circles. My phone read 8 p.m. on the dot. I'd been dying of boredom for 3 hours. Then the fan stopped. The AC cut out with a dying mechanical shudder. Every light went dark at once. The silence hit like something physical, like pressure against my eardrums. I sat up. Outside the window, the entire street had gone black. Not just our house, every house. The street lights, the porch lights, the blue glow of televisions bleeding through curtains. All of it, gone. The only light left in the world was the pale, sweating moon above the roof line. I should have been scared. I was grinning so hard my cheeks hurt. Downstairs, my parents' voices escalated immediately into that rapid-fire practical panic they save for emergencies. My dad thundered toward the kitchen. My mom muttered something about her call not going through. The freezer. They'd obsess over the freezer for at least 20 minutes. The expensive steaks, the ice cream, and they wouldn't come upstairs for anything. I was off the bed before the thought finished. I obviously hadn't planned on the power grid failing, but I had been planning to sneak out tonight for 4 days. Every detail locked in. Tyler waited 2 streets over, parked under the dead oak on Birchwood, engine off. He'd been texting since 7. You coming? Then question mark, then just Chloe. The blackout wasn't a complication. It was a gift. I grabbed my crossbody bag from the hook on the back of the door. No light needed. I'd lived in this room for 16 years. Phone, lip balm, the folded 20 I'd saved from my last babysitting job. I clipped the strap across my chest and moved straight to the window. The screen was the hard part. Old, slightly swollen in the humidity, stuck in the bottom left corner. I'd practiced twice that week. 14 seconds if I kept my cool. I dug my fingers into the frame and pushed up. The screen gave with a soft, sucking pop. I froze. A blinding white beam of light suddenly swept across our front lawn, cutting through the absolute pitch black of the blackout. I flattened my back against the siding, my heart kicking against my ribs. Arthur Pruitt, Oak Ridge Court's self-appointed wannabe FBI agent. Of course, he was already out there in his stupid high-vis vest with his tactical flashlight. The guy lived for this kind of drama. I held my breath, waited for the beam to tilt up to my window. It didn't. The light hit our downstairs kitchen window and locked there. He was just standing in the street, watching my parents freak out about the freezer. Fucking creep. I stayed perfectly still, my shoulders pressed to the wall, counting the seconds in the sweltering heat. Listened. My mom's voice still downstairs. My dad opened a cabinet. I waited until Arthur finally swept his flashlight away toward the Kellerman's house down the street. Once the yard went completely black again, I exhaled. I pushed the screen out onto the roof and set it down on the hot shingles with agonizing care. Then I climbed through. The heat hit first. The roof had baked in direct sun all day. Even now, after 8 p.m., the black shingles pushed warmth up through the soles of my sneakers. I stood on the slope of the lower porch roof, pressed my fingertips to the window ledge. Took 1 second to let my eyes adjust. The neighborhood looked like a photograph of itself. Same houses, same manicured hedges, same driveways, but drained of all color, all light, still like a held breath. The incline wasn't steep, but the dark made it feel different than my practice runs. Steeper, less forgiving. I inched sideways along the roofline toward the corner. Weight low, each foot placed with care so the shingles wouldn't crackle. One slow step, then another. My heart hammered. The good kind. I reached the corner gutter, wide aluminum, bolted under the edge of the roof. I turned, faced the house, lowered myself over the edge. The metal burned under my palms. hot and gritty with dried leaves. I dangled, gauged the drop with my sneakers. Let go! The landing jarred up through my knees. The damp mulch gave, but not enough. I threw a hand out and caught myself, stood fast, checked my palms. Nothing serious. I shook the mulch off my fingers and stepped back onto the lawn. And then I felt it. The silence. Not quiet, silent. No AC units, no distant televisions, no refrigerators humming through open windows. The neighborhood had always made a constant low electrical sound, a sound I'd heard every single day of my life, without once registering it consciously. Gone. Completely and utterly gone. Just the cicadas, just the distant, confused bark of someone's dog 3 streets over. The air sat on my skin like a warm, wet cloth. Without the artificial push of a dozen AC units, the heat felt different. Still, suffocating, almost biological. I stood on the back lawn with my bag against my hip and stared at the dark shapes of the houses crowding the cul-de-sac. Something about the silence felt wrong. Not dangerous. I told myself it wasn't dangerous. Just off. Like the neighborhood had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. I pulled out my phone. Tyler's last text glowed on the screen. Chloe, I started typing. On my way, but the signal bars showed nothing. Not even one. Towers overwhelmed. Every anxious person on the street calling the power company at once. I tucked the phone away, moved fast. I had to move before the towers cleared. I turned toward the back fence line, the wooden slats separating our yard from the neighbor's property. Greg Patterson's side, Golden Retriever Greg, my dad called him. The guy who brought a casserole when my grandmother died. The guy whose lawn looked like a golf course. His yard was the dark gap between me and the side street. I took 3 steps toward the fence and stopped cold. From somewhere on the other side of the wooden slats, in the thick, hot darkness of Greg's driveway, I heard it. A heavy, wet, dragging sound. Chapter 2. I didn't move. The sound came again. Heavy, wet, rhythmic. Like something waterlogged being hauled across concrete in slow, grinding pulls. My hand found the fence post in the dark. The rough wood bit into my palm. I stood completely still and stared at the gap between the slats, seeing nothing but black on the other side. It's nothing. Greg was probably dragging out a hose, a bag of mulch, some ridiculous piece of lawn equipment he felt compelled to organize at 8:30 in the evening, because that was exactly the kind of man Greg Patterson was. I almost convinced myself. Then the sound stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse. I counted to 5, kept my breathing shallow, listened for footsteps, for a door, for anything that would explain it away and let me keep moving. Nothing. I had to get to the side street. Tyler was waiting. The longer I stood here frozen against my own back fence, the worse this got. The cell towers would clear. My mom would check the freezer situation. My dad would do his ritual lap of the house to make sure all the windows were locked. Move. I pulled out my phone, checked the signal bars out of habit. Still nothing. Not a single bar. The tiny battery icon in the corner glowed an angry, thin sliver of red. 30% gone since I'd left my room. The heat was draining it fast. I typed a text to Tyler anyway. 2 minutes, almost there, and hit send. The little wheel spun once and froze. Sending, not sent, just sending, spinning into nowhere. I shoved the phone back into my bag. The smart move was to cut along the fence line and reach the side gate before Greg came out of wherever he'd gone. 30 feet of open lawn, then the wooden gate latch, then the sidewalk, then freedom. I'd done this in my head 100 times. I pushed off the fence post and moved. I stayed low, keeping to the deep shadow of the fence line. The grass was damp under my sneakers, softer than the baked concrete of the driveway, quieter. I pressed my left shoulder close to the fence and walked fast. 1 step, 2. The dragging sound started again. Closer this time, right on the other side of the fence. I stopped, dropped instinctively into a crouch, one knee hovering above the wet grass. My pulse spiked so hard I felt it in my throat. It's just Greg. Just Golden Retriever Greg, the man who shoveled our driveway without being asked, who returned our trash cans from the curb before we even got home, who had called me sport every summer since I was 7 years old. But the sound was wrong. The weight of it was wrong. It wasn't a hose. It wasn't mulch. Something heavy, something that shifted and settled unevenly, something that made the concrete groan. I needed to see. The fence was old, alternating shadow box slats with slim vertical gaps between them. I pressed my eye to the nearest gap and squinted through. Greg's driveway materialized in thin slices of pale moonlight. His black Mercedes sedan sat inside the open garage door, trunk open. The motion sensor floodlight above the garage was dead. No power, same as everything else. The darkness was almost total. I switched to my phone camera without thinking. Low light filter. The screen transformed the black driveway into a grainy green-gray landscape of shapes and shadows. I saw him immediately. Greg. He wore a dark t-shirt soaked through with sweat, and he moved with his side to me, hauling something across the concrete toward the rear of the sedan. A tarp. Heavy-duty blue plastic, thick and industrial, the kind you bought at a hardware store in the tarps and ropes aisle. It was the kind my dad kept in the garage for painting. Greg yanked it backward. The tarp resisted, caught on something, and he yanked again, harder this time. A full-body pull that dragged him 2 steps backward. The plastic screamed against the concrete. He's cleaning up after a storm, some small, reasonable part of my brain offered. He's moving equipment. He's doing something completely normal that people do, and you are crouching in wet grass spying on your neighbor because you are paranoid and weird. I almost lowered the phone. Then I saw the streak. A long, dark smear trailed behind the tarp across the pale concrete. Too dark for water, too thick. It caught the faint moonlight and held it differently than everything around it. My thumb found the red record button. I pressed it. The phone began to film. Greg stopped walking. He set his end of the tarp down with exaggerated care and straightened up. He rolled his right shoulder, the practiced roll of a man with a strained muscle. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a rag. He wiped his hands, both of them, slowly, methodically, the way my dad wiped grease off a wrench. My camera stayed on him, my hand held completely still. There is a completely reasonable explanation for this. Yard work, landscaping, a dead deer from the creek path. That happened twice last summer, and the Bradleys, 3 streets over, had called animal control. A dead deer in a tarp. That was it, obviously. Greg dropped the rag on top of the tarp and reached for the nearest folded edge to adjust the plastic. He pulled it tight. He tucked the fold under. Neat, careful, precise. The tarp shifted. Something pale slipped from the fold at the near end. Heavy, bloodless. An arm. A human arm from elbow to wrist flopped loose against the concrete. The hand settled palm up on the driveway. In the grainy green light of my camera, a ring on the 4th finger. Distinct, unmistakable, a wedding band. I stopped breathing. Greg saw the arm at the same moment. He reached down fast, shoved it back inside the plastic, and pulled the fold tight again. 3 seconds, total, efficient. My phone screen blurred. My hands shook so badly the image stuttered. I crouched in the dirt behind the rhododendron bush at the base of the fence post and pressed my back against the rough wood slats. The camera was still recording. I stared at the dark screen, my whole body locked rigid, and thought one single terrible thought. That was a person. Chapter 3. My knees sank into the wet dirt at the base of the rhododendron, and I didn't care. I couldn't have stood up if I'd tried. The camera was still recording. My thumb hovered over the screen. The little red dot pulsed in the corner of the frame, counting seconds. Stop recording, and get up and go home and lock your window and get back into bed and never think about this again. I couldn't stop recording. I already knew what I'd seen. That was the part I couldn't outrun. No version of it I could reframe, no angle I could tilt it at to make it mean something else. A hand, a ring, a body in a tarp. Through the gap in the fence, Greg reached for the tarp again. He bent low, adjusted his grip with practiced efficiency. No hesitation, no looking around. He just worked. That was the part I couldn't reconcile. I'd expected panic, the frantic, loose movements of someone doing something wrong and knowing it. But Greg's movements were tight and controlled, the way my dad's hands moved when he rebuilt a carburetor. One thing, then the next, then the next. I raised the phone back to the gap. The low-light filter turned his driveway into a gray-green underwater world. Grainy, washed out, but clear enough to see everything. Greg planted his feet wide, bent his knees, and hauled. The tarp moved 6 inches, a wet, grinding scrape that set my teeth on edge. He hauled again. Another 6 inches? He wasn't dragging it toward the side yard or the street. He was dragging it to the back of the Mercedes and knew the open trunk, getting ready to load it, loading it. My brain tried to finish that sentence with something reasonable and failed completely. I pressed closer to the gap. The fence slat dug into my cheekbone. On the screen, Greg straightened up again and rolled his shoulder. He looked directly down at the tarp for a long moment. That was the first time I saw his face properly. No smile. Not the reflexive, pleasant golden retriever grin I'd seen above casserole dishes and snowblowers and 1,000 borrowed power tools. His face was blank in the gray-green light, slack, hollowed of every expression I'd ever associated with him, as if something had reached in and removed the Greg Patterson I knew, leaving only the mechanical thing that shared his body. It was the most frightening face I had ever seen. Because it wasn't frightening at all. It was just empty. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a utility knife, snapped the blade open. I flinched back from the gap so hard I nearly lost my balance. But he only used it to cut a loose piece of plastic binding on the tarp's edge, trimmed it clean, snapped the blade closed, tucked it back in his pocket. My lungs burned. I'd been holding my breath without realizing it, and forced myself to exhale through my nose. Slow, quiet. Tyler. The thought arrived suddenly, desperate. Text Tyler. Tell him to call 911 from wherever he is. Tell him something. I kept the camera trained on Greg and fumbled for the messaging app with my other thumb. The signal bars read 0. I tried anyway. Typed fast, one-handed. Call 911. Something is wrong at Greg Patterson's house on my street. I think the wheel spun. Sending, not sent. I bit down on the inside of my cheek. Blood, sharp and immediate. On screen, Greg bent to the tarp again. He grabbed 2 fistfuls of the plastic near one end and twisted, rewrapping a fold that had loosened during the last drag. He worked quickly now, and the end of the tarp lifted slightly off the concrete as he adjusted. I zoomed in. The low-light filter degraded at maximum zoom. Pixelated, unstable. But the image was still readable. The fold at the near end had shifted. Something pale pushed against the inside of the plastic from below. Rounded. Soft-looking against the rigid blue sheeting. I didn't understand what I was looking at. And then I did. A shoulder. The curve of a shoulder pressing against the tarp from the inside. I pinched the screen, zoomed harder. The plastic pulled tight against the shape beneath it, and my brain assembled the geometry in one terrible, involuntary second. A shoulder, an upper arm, the crook of an elbow. Greg lifted his end higher to resettle his grip. The fold at the bottom gave. An arm slid free. It appeared slowly, the way things moved in nightmares, unhurried and inevitable, from elbow to wrist. A woman's arm, pale as chalk in the gray-green light, the skin slack in a way that skin wasn't supposed to be slack. The hand landed palm up on the concrete with a sound I felt more than heard. Fingers, slightly curled, and on the fourth finger, catching the faint smear of moonlight from above the roofline. A ring. Gold. Simple band. The kind that didn't come off. Greg saw it the same moment I did. He moved fast, shoved the arm back inside the plastic with one hard push, and pulled the fold down over it and held it there, both hands pressing the tarp flat against the concrete. His head bent, his shoulders rising and falling with his breathing. 3 seconds. He stood back up, straightened his t-shirt, picked up his grip again. My phone screen blurred into nothing. I lowered it slowly and realized I was shaking. Not my hands, but my whole body. A deep, structural tremor that started somewhere in my core and radiated outward. My knees knocked against the wet dirt. My teeth pressed together so hard my jaw ached. I knew that ring. I'd seen it 1,000 times through the fence at summer barbecues, wrapped around a hand that passed paper plates and corn on the cob and cold bottles of beer. I'd seen it catch the light above a casserole dish on our front porch. I'd seen it wave goodbye from a car window in the school drop-off line. Linda. That was Linda, Greg's wife, his actual wife, who had been alive this morning. The phone slipped from my grip. I caught it against my palm. And on the driveway, Greg Patterson loaded the tarp into the back of his sedan. Chapter 4. Linda Patterson was in the back of her husband's Mercedes. I pressed my spine flat against the fence and stared up at the black sky. I breathed through my nose in short, controlled pulls the way my gym teacher had taught us during that one stress management unit I'd mostly ignored. In through the nose, out through the mouth. My vision kept trying to go gray at the edges. Don't pass out. The thought was almost funny. Do not pass out in Greg Patterson's backyard. On the other side of the fence, metal scraped against metal. The trunk lid. He was closing the trunk lid. The sound snapped me back. I looked at my phone. The video was still recording. 47 seconds of footage, the little counter ticking upward in the corner. I stared at the number and thought, that's evidence. Some functioning distant part of my brain said it clearly, like a headline. That is evidence of a murder and you are holding it. I stopped the recording. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone for the second time. I opened my messages, pulled up Tyler's thread, and typed without looking at the keys. I filmed something bad. Call 911, Tyler, please. Sending. The wheel spun, nothing. I tried 911 directly. Open the dial pad, hit the 3 numbers, hit call, 1 ring, 2. A recorded voice told me all circuits were busy, and to please try my call again. I ended it, stared at the screen. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be completely alone. I'd always had a signal, even in the dead zones near the reservoir, 1 bar at minimum. I'd never once considered what it felt like to hold the phone and have it be nothing but a rectangle of glass. It felt like being buried. I pressed myself smaller behind the rhododendron and looked back through the fence gap. Greg's driveway sat empty. The sedan was still there, trunk closed, engine off. The dark stain on the concrete was there if you knew to look for it. A long, irregular smear tracking from the middle of the driveway toward the rear bumper. In the dark, it could have been an oil leak, a spilled drink. I knew what it was. Where was he? I scanned the driveway, the open garage, the shadows along the side of the house. Nothing moved. He went inside. My brain offered it like a gift. He finished. He went inside. You have 30 seconds to stand up and walk to the side gate and get out of this yard and run. I looked at the gate. 30 feet of open lawn separated me from it. No cover, just dark grass and the ambient moonlight that made everything faintly, uselessly visible. 30 feet. I could do 30 feet. I shifted my weight forward onto the balls of my feet, got my knees under me, prepared to stand. The back door of Greg's house opened. I dropped back into the dirt so fast I caught a rhododendron branch across the cheek. The sting brought tears to my eyes. I pressed a hand over my mouth. Greg stepped out onto his back patio. He stood still for a moment, just stood there in the dark with his hands at his sides, and looked out at his yard, looked at his fence line, looked at the gate. My gate. I stopped breathing entirely. He scanned slowly, methodically, the same way he edged his lawn, careful, thorough, leaving nothing unchecked. His gaze moved along the fence from the far corner toward the rhododendron bush. I pressed myself into the dirt, as though I could push through it, as though I could simply cease to exist if I tried hard enough. His eyes passed over the bush, kept moving. He looked at the gate for one more second, then turned and walked back to his driveway. He crouched beside the dark stain on the concrete, reached back through the open garage door and retrieved a garden hose, turned the spigot. The water hit the concrete in a flat, spreading rush. He was washing it away. Something in my chest cracked open. You didn't wash blood off your driveway in the dark, methodically, with a garden hose if you were panicking. You did that if you'd thought it through. You did that if you knew exactly what came next. I looked at my phone one more time. The signal bar sat at 0. The battery had dropped to 31% while I crouched here, the screen repeatedly waking itself against my palm and drinking down the charge. I opened my camera roll, pressed play on the video. It was dark and grainy and unstable. 47 seconds of a man doing something that had no innocent explanation. The arm appeared at the 31-second mark. The ring at 34, unmistakable, even through the low-light grain. I had it. I had all of it. And I was trapped behind a bush in a dead signal blackout with a man who had just loaded his wife's body into the back of his car. I closed the camera roll, looked back through the fence gap. Greg stood up from the driveway, turned off the hose, coiled it with neat automatic efficiency back through the garage door. Then he straightened up and turned to face the rhododendron bush. Not the fence line, not the gate, not the general direction of my yard. The bush, specifically, directly. He stood perfectly still, stared at it with his empty face and said nothing at all. Every cell in my body understood simultaneously what my brain was still refusing to finish processing. He knew I was there. Chapter 5. He was looking right at me. I knew it. Every animal instinct I didn't know I had screamed at once. The prickling up the back of my neck, the sudden cold sweat across my shoulder blades, despite the suffocating heat, the way my vision tunneled to nothing but his silhouette, motionless at the edge of the driveway. He hadn't moved. Neither had I. My legs had simply stopped working. Some circuit between my brain and my body had tripped and gone dark, the same way the grid had blown an hour ago, completely and without warning, leaving nothing but silence where there should have been movement. Run. My brain fired it like a starting pistol. Get up and run. My legs didn't receive the message. Greg tilted his head slightly to the left. That small, unhurried movement broke something loose in me. My phone was in my hand. My hand shook so violently the screen blurred in and out of focus. I blinked hard, forced my thumbs to work. I opened the camera roll, found the video, 47 seconds, the arm, the ring, all of it. I hit the share icon, pulled up my messages, opened Tyler's thread, and attached the file. Hit send without typing a single word. The loading wheel appeared. It spun. No service. Gray text beneath the message bubble. Not delivered. I tried again, forwarded it to my mom's number this time. She was 50 feet away inside my house, completely unreachable through several feet of insulated wall and 0 signal bars. The wheel spun and failed identically. I tried 911. All circuits are currently busy. Please try your call again. A sound came out of me. Not a sob. Something smaller and more horrifying than that. A thin, pressurized exhale through my nose. The sound of someone holding themselves together by a thread so fine it had become invisible. Across the driveway, Greg hadn't moved. He stood there with his head tilted and his hands loose at his sides, looking at the dark hedge with that emptied-out face. Patient in a way that felt less like uncertainty and more like a cat waiting outside a mouse hole. That was the only thing keeping me alive right now. He wasn't sure. I had to get back to my house. The thought organized itself with sudden, crystalline clarity. Forget Tyler. Forget the video. Forget 911. 50 feet of open lawn separated me from the back door. My parents were inside that house. If I could cover the distance without making a sound, I could pound on the glass and scream, and none of this would be mine to carry alone anymore. I just had to stand up. I looked at the open lawn behind me. Dark grass, pale moonlight, no cover whatsoever between the rhododendron and the house. I looked back at Greg, still there, still watching. If I moved, he'd see me. If I stayed here, he'd find me eventually. He was already looking. He was already waiting. The only question was how long before he stopped waiting and started checking. Move fast or don't move at all. I chose fast. I shifted my weight forward, gathered my left leg under me. My sneaker pressed into the soft dirt. I found my balance. Breathed once, tensed. And the large, dry rhododendron branch beneath my left heel snapped in half. The crack split the silent night like a rifle shot. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my life, louder than the transformer blowing, louder than every AC unit on the street combined. It ricocheted off the fence slats and the siding of Greg's house, and came back at me from 3 directions simultaneously. For one suspended, terrible second, the entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath in response. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My eyes locked on Greg through the gap in the fence. He'd stopped tilting his head. He stood straight now, both feet planted, shoulders squared toward the rhododendron with the calm, unhurried certainty of a man who no longer had any doubt at all. He reached back and closed the side garage door behind him. Then he walked toward the fence. Chapter 6. He walked toward the fence like he had all the time in the world. No urgency, no hesitation. Steady, deliberate footsteps across the concrete, the unhurried stride of a man who had already decided how this ended. I scrambled backward, hands and knees in the wet dirt, moving blind, branches raking across my forearms and catching in my hair. The rhododendron tore at me from every direction. I didn't feel any of it. My body had bypassed pain entirely and gone straight to pure animal survival. Back, get away from the fence. My knee found a root and buckled. I caught myself on one palm and kept moving. The grass was slick with humidity. My sneakers couldn't find purchase. Greg's footsteps stopped at the fence line. I stopped too. Pressed flat against the ground, cheek in the dirt, arms folded under my chest. Tried to make myself small, tried to make myself nothing. The wet grass soaked through my t-shirt instantly. Through the fence gap, I watched his shoes. Dark sneakers, laces double knotted. They stood 6 inches from the base of the slats. He didn't speak. He just stood there and breathed. I could hear it. Slow and controlled in through the nose. The breathing of a man who was not panicking even slightly. My own breath came in ragged, microscopic sips. My lungs screamed for more. I denied them. He doesn't know exactly where you are. The thought arrived like a lifeline. He heard the snap. He knows the general area, but it's dark and you're flat on the ground, and if you don't move... His shoe shifted. The toe turned left. He was moving along the fence line, checking the length of it, looking for a gap, a gate, a way through. Looking for me. The tunnel vision hit without warning. The edges of my vision went dark and soft. The center sharpened down to a pinpoint of hyper-focused clarity. My hands stopped shaking. Some deep biological switch flipped. On the other side was a cold, crystalline stillness that felt nothing like calm. It felt like a shutdown. Your phone. The functional part of my brain fired it. Send the video, try again. If the signal clears for even 1 second, The phone was still in my right hand. Open the share screen again. Tyler's thread. Attach the video. Hit send. Sending. The wheel spun in the dark, and I stared at it with my whole ruined heart. Come on. I willed it through the glass with everything I had. 1 bar. 1 single bar. Send it somewhere. Send it to anyone. The wheel stopped. Not delivered. I bit down so hard on the inside of my lip that I tasted blood for the second time tonight. I pulled up my mom's contact, attached the video again, sending. Greg's footsteps resumed, moving away from my position toward the far end of the fence, toward the gate. He's going around. The realization detonated through my chest. He wasn't going to climb the fence blindly. He was going to open the gate and come through properly. The way a man who lived next door would do it. Casual and unstoppable. 30 seconds, maybe less. I had to run. Right now. Cross the open lawn to the back door and pound on the glass and scream until my parents came. None of this would matter then. I'd be inside and he'd be outside. A locked door and 2 adults between me and whatever Greg Patterson had become tonight. Run. I got my feet under me, crouched low, looked at the back door. A pale rectangle of glass 50 feet away, my mom's dark silhouette barely visible, moved around inside with a candle. 50 feet. I could do 50 feet. I pushed off. 1 step. 2. My sneakers hit the grass silently. The gate latch clicked. I spun. Instinct. Looked back over my shoulder. My right foot hit a dip in the lawn. My ankle rolled. My arms windmilled. I reached for anything, grabbed nothing. My palm hit the grass. The phone hit a second later. Face up. The screen blazed to life on impact. Full brightness, maximum backlight. It shot a column of cold white light straight up into the dark sky like a flare. I stared at it. It stared back at me. My heart came to a halt. The gate swung open. Chapter 7. The screen lit the whole yard. Not a glow, not a shimmer. A spotlight. The impact had cranked the brightness to maximum, and the white rectangle blazed up from the grass like something industrial. The kind of light that didn't hide things, that stripped away every shadow within 10 feet and left everything it touched completely, mercilessly exposed. Including me. I was on my hands and knees in the middle of my own backyard, lit up like a specimen on a slide, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. I lunged for the phone. My fingers closed around the case. I flipped it face down into the grass. Killed the light. Too late. From the direction of the gate, the footsteps had already stopped. I straightened up onto my knees and looked. Greg stood at the entrance to my yard, one hand on the gatepost, head slightly forward, the way a person stood when their eyes were still adjusting from movement to stillness. He looked at the dark grass where the light had been. Then he looked at me. The distance between us was maybe 20 feet. In daylight, I could have read his expression clearly. Every shift and micro-movement of the face I'd known my whole life. In the dark, I could only read the broad strokes, the set of his shoulders, the angle of his chin. He wasn't surprised. That was what hit me hardest. Not fear, not aggression. A complete, settled absence of surprise. Like he'd been expecting to find exactly this. Exactly here. I got my feet under me and ran. Not toward him. Left, cutting hard across the yard toward the back door. Away from the gate, away from the fence line, angling for the house. I'd made it 4 steps when his footsteps hit the grass behind me. Fast. Too fast. I hadn't known Greg Patterson could move like that. He was a big man. Broad through the shoulders, with the soft middle of someone who'd played sports in college and stopped. He crossed the yard with a speed that didn't match any version of him I'd ever seen. Not the man on the riding mower, not the man at the fence with a beer in his hand, talking property taxes. Someone else entirely. I cut harder left. My sneaker slipped on the wet grass. I caught myself on one hand, shoved upright, and kept running. The back door was right there, 20 feet. 15. My mom's candle still moved behind the glass. I opened my mouth to scream. His hand closed around my upper arm. The grip was immediate and total. Not a grab, not a lunge. A controlled clamp that stopped my forward momentum so completely it wrenched my shoulder. I spun sideways, off balance, and he stepped with me, adjusting his grip, using my own weight against me. I screamed. The sound tore out of me raw and full-throated. I didn't care about anything anymore. Not getting caught, not Tyler, not any of it. I just screamed and kept screaming. His other hand covered my mouth. The palm was huge. It sealed across my face from my chin to my nose and muffled everything down to a pressurized, useless moan. I tasted soap and blood and the chemical bite of the latex work gloves he'd taken off at some point and the skin beneath. I bit him, hard, canine teeth into the meat of his palm. He didn't make a sound, just tightened the grip, adjusted. I kicked backward, connected with his shin, once, twice, my heel against bone. He absorbed both hits with a short, irritated exhale, the sound of a man stepping on a nail, not a man being hurt. He hauled me backward off my feet. My sneakers left the ground. I kept kicking, kept fighting, my elbow connected with his ribs. I felt the impact shudder up my arm and still nothing. He didn't stumble. He didn't loosen his grip. He walked me backward across my own lawn, like I weighed nothing, like he'd done this before. He has. Something cold and certain said inside me. He just did it an hour ago. The fight went out of me. It was so sudden it felt like a physical thing leaving my body. Not surrender. Shock. The specific paralyzing shock of understanding something true that your brain has been refusing to finish. Linda hadn't surprised him. The tarp, the hose, the utility knife already in his pocket, the methodical, sequential efficiency of a man moving through a practice set of steps. He'd been ready. Greg turned us both, and I saw the fence line. My fence, the wooden slats between my yard and his, and the gate standing open. Beyond it, the dark concrete of his driveway. He was taking me back. I started screaming again against his palm. Useless, pressurized, horrifying sounds that went nowhere. My fingers clawed at his forearm. My sneakers dragged furrows in the wet grass. He didn't slow down. At the gate, he shifted his grip, pinned both my arms against my sides with one encircling hold, and walked me through into his yard. The gate swung shut behind us. The latch clicked. I looked back at my house. The candle still moved behind the dark glass. My mom was right there, 20 feet away, 30, 50, 100, as he pulled me further into his driveway. She had no idea. The garage door was closed now. He walked me toward the side door, a plain wooden door set into the garage's exterior wall that I'd walked past 1,000 times on the way to borrow something or return something or wave hello. He reached past me, opened it. The dark inside swallowed everything. And from somewhere in the pitch black, beneath the smell of motor oil and fertilizer and hot-trapped air, I heard the thing that took the last of my fight completely away. A man's voice. On the other side of the wall, close, frightened. And then the unmistakable sound of a garage door somewhere inside beginning to roll shut. Chapter 8. The garage swallowed me whole. The descending door completed its journey down with a thud. Greg released his grip in the same motion, a controlled drop, not a throw. I stumbled forward into the dark and hit something solid with my hip. A workbench. The edge caught me hard across the bone. I grabbed it with both hands to keep from going down. I spun around. The door was still open. A thin rectangle of slightly less dark-framed Greg's silhouette in the doorway. He stood with one hand on the frame and looked at me without speaking. I ran for the gap. 3 steps, maybe 4. He filled the doorway before I reached it. Not a lunge, a step. One unhurried step forward that consumed the entire exit, his shoulders spanning the frame, and I pulled up short so fast my sneakers squealed against the concrete. We stood 2 feet apart. I couldn't see his face, just the shape of him, big and still, and completely blocking the only door I knew about. Behind me, the garage pressed in from all sides. The smell hit me fully for the first time. Motor oil fertilizer, the hot chemical sweetness of stored gasoline. Under all of it, something else. Blood, dark and close. Linda. She was in here. The thought moved through me like ice water. She was in here. My legs started to shake, not the productive adrenaline shake of running, the deep structural tremor of a body that had used everything it had and found the tank empty. He reached back and pulled the door shut. I backed up. 1 step, 2. My hands found the workbench again. I pressed against it and put as much distance between myself and Greg's silhouette as the garage allowed. "Don't," I said. My voice came out wrong. Too thin. A child's voice, high and pressured. Nothing like the voice in my head. Greg didn't move. "My parents are right there." I pointed at the wall like he didn't know where my house was. "They're going to notice I'm gone. My mom checks on me. She checks constantly. She's obsessive about it. And when she finds my window open, she's going to—" He said nothing. That was its own answer. He was right. I hated that he was right. I hated that he'd thought about it, that he knew exactly how I'd calculated my window, and he'd simply folded that calculation into his own. Isifer. I pressed harder against the workbench. Something cylindrical met my palm. A handle. Cool metal. My fingers curled around it without looking down. Whatever it was, I held it. Greg still hadn't moved from the doorway. He just stood in the dark rectangle. I breathed and let the silence do the work for him. That was the most terrifying thing. He didn't need to threaten me. He didn't need to chase me or hurt me or even raise his voice. He just needed to stand between me and the exit and wait. He understood something I was only now beginning to grasp. There was nowhere for me to go. The main rolling door needed power. He must have rolled it down somehow. The grid was dead. Even if I found the manual release in the dark, the noise would give me away before I got it halfway up. My phone was on the grass. Dead signal, dying battery. Maybe my dad would find it and... My voice couldn't carry through insulated walls to parents convinced their daughter was upstairs in her room. I was 16 years old in a locked garage with a man who had put his wife in a tarp, and I had absolutely no defense. The metal handle in my fist. That was all. I rolled the shaft across my palm without looking down. Long handle, heavy head, a hammer maybe, or a wrench. If he comes toward you, swing. Greg finally moved, 1 step forward, then another. Slow and deliberate, crossing the garage floor with his hands loose at his sides, his footsteps measured against the concrete. I raised the handle. He stopped, looked at my hand, at whatever I was holding. I still hadn't looked, couldn't take my eyes off his silhouette to look. He tilted his head. "Put it down, Chloe." He looked at my hand, then my face, said nothing. I didn't put it down. Something shifted in the dark behind me. A sound, faint and directionless. A scuff of shoe leather against concrete, or a breath, or the ghost of one. Too deliberate for the house settling, too close. Every hair on my body rose simultaneously. I wasn't alone in here. Someone else was in the garage, in the dark behind me. Deeper in, hidden in the black space between the workbench and the far wall. Something breathed. Something that had been very, very still until this exact moment. I couldn't turn around. Turning around meant taking my eyes off Greg. But the presence behind me pressed against my awareness like a physical weight. In one sick, cascading moment, I understood I'd been thinking about this wrong. Too focused on the door, on Greg, on the exit, never once checking what was already inside with me. Greg watched me process it. His chin dipped slightly. The ghost of an expression crossed his face in the dark. Not a smile, not quite. something quieter. He took one more step forward. Then he leaned down slowly and brought his face level with mine. I froze, couldn't move. He came close enough that I could smell the blood on him, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his skin in the stifling garage air. His voice dropped, flat, certain. "You shouldn't be out this late, Chloe." Chapter 9. I swung the handle, blind, hard, a full arc from my right shoulder toward the shape of him in the dark. He caught my wrist, not the tool, my wrist. His hand closed around the bone before the swing connected, and he twisted, one sharp rotation. The pain that detonated up my forearm was so immediate and total that my fingers opened on their own. The tool hit the concrete somewhere behind me with a loud ringing clang. I screamed. He covered my mouth before the sound fully left my throat. The palms sealed across my face, chin to nose, the same grip as before. The grip he'd already practiced once tonight. The scream compressed into a pressurized, useless moan that went nowhere. I clawed at his forearm with my free hand, fingernails, both hands. Once he released my wrist. I dug in and raked downward. I felt skin give under my nails. He made a short, tight sound. Not pain, not quite, more like acknowledgement, and shifted his grip to accommodate it. He'd thought about this too. That was the horror that kept compounding. Every move I made, he'd already considered. He wasn't reacting to me. He was just managing variables. I stopped clawing and bit him instead. Same spot as the backyard. The meat of his palm, below the thumb. I bit down with everything I had. Blood on my tongue. I held on. His whole body went rigid. For 1 second, one single second, the grip on my face loosened by a fraction. I wrenched sideways, got half a breath of unfiltered air, and spent it screaming, "Help!" The hand came back, harder this time. His other arm wrapped around my torso, pinning both my arms against my sides, lifting me partially off the ground. Somewhere behind me in the dark, deeper in the garage, from the far wall, something moved. Not Greg. The sounds were coming from 2 different places now. Greg was right against me, his breathing loud in my ear. The other sound was further. A shoe, scraping concrete, a body-shifting weight. Someone else was locked in the garage with us. Scream at them! My brain fired it urgently. Scream at whoever is back there! Greg's grip tightened in anticipation, like he'd read the thought. I kicked instead, both legs alternating, driving my heels back into his shins with everything I had. The impact registered. He adjusted his stance to absorb the next one, planted his feet wider. He turned me around, drove me backward toward the garage door. My sneakers dragged across the concrete in short, frantic arcs. I got one toe down and pushed hard off the floor. He absorbed it. I got my elbow free for half a second and drove it back into his ribs. A real exhale this time. Sharp. His hand found the back of my collar, and he yanked back. The fabric cinched tight across my throat. Not enough to cut air. Enough to eliminate the exit. I sobbed against his palm. Not a calculated sound, not a strategy, just the involuntary, humiliating sound of a body that had hit its limit. The rear bumper of the Mercedes met the back of my knees. I looked at the massive dark shape of the car parked in the center of the garage. My brain finally, fully processed what came next. Not as a fear, not as an abstract worst-case scenario, but as a concrete, imminent sequence of events. The trunk, the dark inside it, the lid coming down. Linda. I couldn't finish the thought. A sound escaped me that I didn't have a name for. "Stop," I said against his palm, muffled, useless. "Stop, please, I won't. I didn't see anything. I deleted the video. I swear I deleted." He didn't stop. He shifted his grip, pinning me against the trunk lid with his body weight, and his free hand reached blindly across the workbench next to the car. A dry plastic rattle. Then a sharp, stiff flick. I couldn't see what he was holding. And from the deepest shadows at the far end of the sealed garage, a man's voice, a single word. Greg. Greg heard it. His whole body went still for exactly 1 second. His head turned toward the dark, a fraction, involuntary. And in that 1 second, his grip on me recalibrated from management to absolute terrifying urgency. Whatever was happening in this garage had just changed his timeline. He moved faster now. Chapter 10. Stop. Greg's voice was a low hiss, not a threat, an instruction. I stopped twisting, not because he told me to, because the voice from the far end of the garage was still there. Closer now. Someone was in here with us, and Greg was deliberately putting himself between me and whoever it was. He spun me around. Both wrists caught behind my back in one motion. The stiff plastic went on before I could pull free. A quick blind loop the tab fed through, and then I knew exactly what he had taken from the workbench. The ratchet sound. Zip. Click, 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 each increment tighter than the last. The heavy-duty zip tie bit into the skin above my wrist bones. Not enough to cut circulation, exactly enough to make escape impossible. I started to cry. Real crying. Ugly and involuntary. From somewhere below conscious thought. You? Greg stepped back, looked at me once with that empty, evacuated face. Then he turned toward the dark interior of the garage. I know you're in here, Mark, Greg said, completely level, conversational. Mark. The name hit before I could stop it. Mark Evans, the neighbor across the street, the man who waved when he got his mail. A safe adult, in this garage, right now. Hope flared so fast and hot it choked me. I lurched forward against my zip-tied wrists, screaming past Greg's shoulder into the pitch-black garage. Mark, Dr. Evans, it's Chloe. Chloe Miller from next door. Please help me. He killed... Greg didn't even look at me. His hand clamped violently over my mouth, cutting the plea off in my throat. He pressed me back against the workbench, his eyes never leaving the dark at the far end of the garage. Silence. Nobody answered. Nobody stepped out of the shadows. Dr. Evans stayed completely, terribly hidden in the dark. Greg watched the blackness for 3 seconds. Then he removed his hand from my mouth, turned his back on the silence, and reached for the sedan's trunk. He pushed something, and the trunk release popped. The lid rose. I didn't think. I ran. Wrists bound behind my back, balance completely gone, no plan beyond a way. I threw myself sideways. My sneakers hit the concrete. I bolted for the side door with everything I had left. I made it 4 steps. Greg's hand closed around my collar. The fabric cinched across my throat. My feet left the ground for 1 lurching second before he swung me back toward the car. I screamed, kicked, both legs cycling wildly, sneakers connecting with nothing. He walked me back to the bumper in 4 steps. I looked at the open trunk. Dark carpeting, a black rectangle of trapped heat. The interior light that should have been glowing wasn't. No bulb, just darkness going down into more darkness. No, 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 no! He put both hands on my waist. I went completely rigid. Every muscle locked simultaneously. My sneakers found the bumper. I drove backward with everything. Legs, shoulders, full body weight. He lifted me off the ground anyway, like I weighed nothing at all. My shoulder hit the carpet. The trunk smell enveloped me immediately, hot and stale and chemical. But it wasn't just carpet. I didn't land on a flat surface. I landed against something heavy, bulky, and unyielding. The thick, stiff plastic of an industrial tarp crinkled loudly under my weight. The smell of blood hit the back of my throat like a physical blow. I writhed away from it, pressed my back against the side wall of the trunk, but there was no room. My legs tangled against the shape inside the plastic. Dense, heavy, horrifyingly rigid. The dead weight of a human body already beginning to stiffen in the heat. Linda? A wave of pure, violent revulsion tore through my stomach. I gagged, my throat closed up. My bound hands frantically scraped against the carpet as I tried to pull myself away from the corpse I was pressed against. I looked up at Greg from inside the dark box, suffocating on the smell of his murdered wife. Greg, please, I have a family. I live next door. You know me. He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes shifted away from me, looking at the underside of the raised trunk lid. His hand reached up. His fingers closed around a small, glow-in-the-dark plastic T-handle. He wrapped the nylon cable around his knuckles, braced his other hand against the metal, and yanked violently. A harsh plastic snap echoed in the garage. He tore the entire thing off. He looked down at me with that empty, evacuated face and tossed the broken handle onto my chest. Please? He took hold of the trunk lid. The lid came down. The latch caught like a gunshot. Darkness. Not the dark of a room at night. Not the dark of a neighborhood without power. A different category. Sealed and pressurized. The darkness of a space never designed for human eyes, shared with something that was no longer human. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see the tarp, but I could feel it touching my leg. I screamed, full-throated, tearing screams that bounced back from the walls and went nowhere. The trunk absorbed them. I felt the sound dying against the carpet, the insulation eating it. Nobody heard me. I screamed until my throat gave out. Then I rolled onto my side, curled my knees up to my chest to keep them as far away from the tarp as the cramped space allowed. Get your hands in front. Step through them. I rolled to my back, pulled my knees to my chest, tried to work my bound wrists under my hips and down past my legs. The zip tie hit my hip bone and stopped. Too tight, too rigid. I lay on my side in the dark and panted, trying to think past the heat and the overpowering smell of blood and death. The release handle. It arrived in the specific voice of a TikTok I'd watched months ago at midnight. Every car manufactured after 2001 must have an interior trunk release by federal law. But I already knew. I felt the broken plastic T-handle resting against my ribs where he had dropped it. I twisted onto my back anyway, raised my bound hands as high as the space allowed, felt along the rear wall with my fingertips, the latch housing, the carpet surrounding it. Just carpet pulled smooth over bare metal, with the jagged, broken plastic hole where my only way out used to be. The sound that came out of me wasn't a scream, smaller and more broken, a single compressed note of pure despair. Outside the trunk, muffled through metal and carpet and dark, I heard voices, 2 of them, then something that might have been a struggle. I opened my mouth and screamed again anyway, because it was the only thing left to do. Chapter 11. 2 voices. I screamed toward them, both knees drawn up, feet flat against the trunk lid. Every cubic inch of air I had left aimed at the rear seat divider like a battering ram. Help me! I'm in the trunk! I'm in the car! The words bounced back at me from the carpet and the metal and the sealed lid and went nowhere. I kicked the lid anyway. Both feet drove upward from the knee. The hardest impact I could generate in the cramped space. Not much. The metal rang, hollow and resonant, and died instantly. Outside, the voices continued. 2 of them. Still there. Beyond the back seat, beyond the divider, somewhere in the pitch-black garage. One voice was Greg's. Patient, leveled, unhurried. The other voice was Mark's. He was angry, the tight, pressurized kind of anger that lived just below the surface of someone running on raw adrenaline. Short sentences, hard consonants. I filled my lungs. In here! I aimed it directly at the divider. I'm in the trunk. Help me, please. I kicked the lid in rhythm with the screaming. The voices stopped. One beat of absolute silence. My heart lurched. They heard it. Then Mark's voice again, sharper now, directed at something specific. Where is she? Greg, where's my wife? Greg's response was quieter. Whatever he said, Mark didn't accept it. The garage erupted. Movement, fast, physical, and uncontrolled. Feet on concrete. Something heavy connecting with the surface. A grunt of impact followed immediately by a crash that sent something metal skittering across the garage floor. They were fighting. I kicked harder, screamed louder. The plastic of the tarp crinkled wildly beneath my legs as I thrashed in the dark, trying to insert myself into whatever was happening out there. The struggle moved around the garage. Impacts, footsteps. The Mercedes rocked on its suspension. A sudden, violent lurch that threw me hard against the interior wall. The chassis shuddered like something had hit the exterior with significant force. A body. Someone had hit the car with their body. I froze. The struggle was right there, inches away, on the other side of the sheet metal. Two men collided against the trunk's exterior. The vibration moved through the carpet and into my cheek. Another impact, harder. The sound of something. A fist, an elbow, a skull, connected with the body panel at full force. Then a massive metallic screech tore through the garage. It wasn't a car part. It was the sound of a heavy steel track vibrating. The garage door. A body had been thrown against the center of the garage door. The distinct, sharp snap of the emergency release cord being yanked hard, disconnecting the heavy motorized chain from the track. The metal panels groaned. "Help!" Mark's voice roared, no longer muffled by walls, but booming directly into the open air. The garage door was rolling up. The sealed, suffocating heat of the garage was suddenly pierced by the humid rush of the outside night. I heard the cicadas. I heard the street. The darkness pressing against the trunk lid shifted. The garage was open. We were exposed to the driveway. A heavy thud vibrated against the rear quarter panel. "Where is she?" Mark screamed. Mark sounded in control. Maybe he had Greg pinned against the car. I didn't stop to think. I didn't try to understand the words. I just sucked in a lungful of stifling air and screamed back, "I'm Chloe. I'm in the trunk. I'm right here. Please." And then I heard the sirens. Chapter 12. The sirens wailed from the main road, high and wavering, cutting through the cicadas and the heat. The police were coming. The fight outside the trunk stopped. Not gradually, all at once. 1 second the garage was full of movement, feet on concrete, bodies hitting the car. And then it simply stopped. I held my breath, pressed my ear flat against the trunk wall. Tires screamed against asphalt, screeched to a halt at the edge of the driveway. Doors flew open. Heavy boots hit the pavement. Voices overlapped in a wall of controlled professional urgency. "Help me!" I screamed. I kicked the lid with both feet, ignored the sickening crinkle of the bloody tarp beneath me. "I'm in here!" A heavy iron impact smashed against the exterior of the trunk lock. Crunch, the metal deformed. The sound was deafening inside the cramped box. Someone was swinging a heavy tool at the latch. Blinding, strobing light bled through the tiny gaps in the trunk's deformed wall. Red, blue, red, blue. "I need backup at the vehicle! I need backup now!" A police officer shouted from the driveway. Crunch. The iron hit the lock again, harder this time. The latch sheared completely. The housing tore from the frame with a squeal of stressed metal. The trunk lid flew open. The night sky rushed in. Red and blue strobes blinded me. I flinched, curled into a tight ball, turned my face away from the terrible dark shape of the tarp beside me, and sobbed uncontrollably. A flashlight beam hit my face. "I've got you," a man's voice said. Low, steady, the voice of someone managing an emergency. Not a cop, someone from the neighborhood. I've got you. Strong hands reached over the bumper. David Marsh. He hooked his hands under my arms and pulled me up and out of the suffocating heat of the trunk, away from the smell of blood and the plastic. My legs gave out the second my sneakers hit the asphalt of the driveway. David caught me. He wrapped his arm tightly around my shaking shoulders, holding me up against the side of the car. I buried my face in his chest, gasping for air in the strobe-lit dark of the cul-de-sac. 10 feet away, 2 police officers tackled Greg to the concrete. Mark Evans stood above them, his chest heaving, the heavy iron wrench dangling from his grip. He stared down at Greg with eyes that no longer looked human. Why? Mark's voice cracked, raw, and completely broken. Why did you kill her? What did you do to Erin? Greg's face was pressed into the asphalt under the officer's knee. His hands were wrenched behind his back, but he lifted his head, his eyes wild and desperate, and screamed over the noise of the sirens. I didn't mean to, Greg shrieked, his voice tearing. Linda just stormed in. She had her phone. Someone texted her Mark. Someone told her we were down there. The words hit the humid air and hung there. Mark froze. I stopped shaking. I pulled my face away from David's chest and looked at Greg. Someone knew, Greg sobbed into the pavement, thrashing under the cops. Someone in this neighborhood set us up. They made her come down there. A cold, paralyzing dread washed over me, heavier than the heat of the trunk. I turned my head. I looked past the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers. I looked out at the dark, silent cul-de-sac, the massive, expensive houses standing like black monoliths against the night sky. No power, no cameras, no lights. But someone inside one of those dark houses had been watching us. Someone had typed a text message, hit send, and started a murder. And they were still in the dark right now, watching us burn. End of Book 2. You've been listening to The Blackout, Book 2, The Witness, written by Ion Esimai, published by Superior Press, and Earreads production. Copyright 2026 by Ion Esimai. All rights reserved. You survived the night with Chloe. You felt every second. But while she was in the dark, someone was watching. They saw it all, every move, every mistake. And they didn't call for help. The story continues. Book 3, The Stalker, available now.